Hello, I'm Jane Robertson from employee wellbeing streaming service provider Frog Systems, and welcome to today's discussion, which is all about how to manage a multi-generational workforce. For the first time, we now have 5 generations in the working population. So how do you make your organisation a welcome and engaging place to work for everyone from Gen Z to baby boomers? How do we avoid ageism against young and old? And why should an employer care about being inclusive of all ages? We have 3 expert guests who are involved in different aspects of research, training and policymaking in this area. Daniel Jollis from the LSE, Denise Burke from United for All Ages, and Michael O'Reilly from the Age Diversity Network will share their insight to help you understand the importance of creating an age-inclusive working environment that supports everyone at all stages of their careers. As always, please feel free to post any questions into the chat that you'd like us to answer during our conversation. So without further ado, let's meet the guests properly and find out a little bit more about them. Daniel, let's go with you first. What's your role in looking at this ageism in the workplace for the LSE?
Terrific. Hi, Jane. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me today. So I'm a behavioural scientist and I'm a researcher at the London School of Economics in a team called the Inclusion Initiative. And in the Inclusion Initiative, we're concerned with inclusion across all diversity dimensions, but I'm particularly interested in age. I've just finished my PhD where I've looked at behavioural science tools that we can use in our workplaces to create longer, fulfilling working lives. So I'm very interested in this topic and happy to be with you all today.
It's great to have you along, Daniel. Thanks so much for joining us today. Denise, how about you and the work that you do?
Yeah, hi, I'm Denise Burke and I'm co-founder of United for All Ages that was launched in 2010. And I guess our aim was very much about bringing the ages together, sort of young, old and everybody in between. The work that we do is very much looking at co-located sites, mixing the ages in schools, particularly on housing, but also the subject that we're talking to today, which is the multi-generational workforce.
Lovely, thanks Denise. And Michael, last but not least.
Yeah, thank you, Jane, and thank you for everyone who's joined today. Yes, name's Michael O'Reilly. I'm the founder of the Age Diversity Network, and like the other guests, particularly keen on the ageism aspect. That's why we're all here. I do focus very much so on the older workforce and our aging workforce, although there's clearly a benefit to a multi-generational workforce, mixing these with the youngsters, and we spend quite a lot of time speaking to organisations about how to achieve that and the benefits that they can derive from it.
I think we're going to have a fantastic conversation with the 3 of you, so thank you very much, and thanks to everybody who's tuning in. Daniel, perhaps we could start by sort of fleshing out why multi-generational workforces, well, why we've got these 5 generations in the workforce now, and what that means for employers through the research that you're doing. Why is it so important?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing, which I think everyone in the audience is aware of, is that we have an aging population. So the good news is we're living longer than ever before, which is great, but we also have declining birth rates. So what that means is that the makeup of our population is changing. And if we look around us now, around 1/3 of the workforce is already aged over 50, which I think is quite staggering, really, when we think about the makeup of our workforce. And on top of that, we have workers over the age of 65 who are doubling in their representation in the workforce. So it's one of the fastest growing segments. And traditionally, when we talk about talent, we're often thinking about people who are entering the workforce for the first time, but actually the fastest growing talent segment is those over the age of 55. Now, unfortunately, what we're seeing is that older people are exiting the workforce earlier than what would be ideal. And here in the UK and in other parts of the world, productivity is a real concern. So we've seen a bit of a productivity slowdown. There's a lot of questions after COVID-19 of how we're going to increase productivity. And we believe that multi-generational teams have a real role to play in boosting productivity. And there's good evidence that suggests that inclusion can drive that. So at the LSE, where I'm working, we have a project running at the moment where we're really trying to bring together diverse teams to really demonstrate the business case for diversity and make sure that we're getting intergenerational teams working better together.
And where you're trying to bring people of different ages together in the workforce, how are you trying to do that?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we do is we work with companies where they're at. So we don't demand that they have a certain type of diversity. We want to meet them where they are. And I think one of the things about age that makes it interesting and really nice as a diversity characteristic is age is something that we all share. So we've all been or are younger at one point in our lives, and we all will be or are older at another point in our lives. And the way that that intersects with other diversity characteristics, whether it be our gender, our race, ethnicity, or our socioeconomic status, is really interesting the way it contributes to the overall diversity. Now, I'm a big believer, and I think there's good evidence that when we get diverse perspectives together, that it can really enhance the creativity, the innovation, and the performance of our teams. But in order for that to happen, I think what we need really good inclusive management practices. So at the LSE, we're really trying to drill down on what the specific things leaders can do to create that inclusion. And age inclusion is a really big part of that.
And Denise, obviously, Daniel's mentioned the growing number of people who are older in the workforce, and presumably that reflects on women in the workforce potentially. And I don't know whether, are women staying on to work longer, or are they actually leaving the workforce and we need them back in the workforce?
Well, I think there's a sort of a tale of two different kinds of sectors here. If we look at, if you like, the lower paid sectors, we are certainly losing very valuable older potentially working women from the workforce. And in particular, if we look at the sort of social care and childcare sectors, where both recruitment and retention is becoming quite critical. And actually, I think that's because these individuals, they get to state pension age, they feel very tired, they feel very worn out, they feel that the reward, if you like, of the pay in these sectors it does not incentivize them to stay in the sector. And until we can work out how we pay these sectors better, we're going to continue to lose those very valuable individuals that could actually keep the sector going.
And Michael, you work with companies, don't you? You go in to talk about ageism in the workforce in the companies that you work with. What are the sort of challenges that you come across and that companies are having that you're dealing with?
I think there's a number of challenges really, but picking up on a couple of the things that Daniel and Denise said, I think the differences between age groups, there are clearly different needs, but by bringing them together and understanding what those needs are, each age category, I guess, can learn from each other, they can bounce off each other, they can work much better together. And the challenges that I see really are with an older worker or our aging workforce. Often I will see that for whatever reason, there's these myths out there that if they've been out of work for a period of time, or if they need to have flexible approach to their working environment, if they're looking for work. So getting back into work is a real challenge, because I think there's these these unfair, I guess, assumptions that are often made about an aging workforce. Yes, of course, there are potential health issues, but it's about understanding what they can bring to the workforce and how they can work with their younger colleagues together. So the challenge really is getting organisations more involved, whereas often they may take an easy route, but it's understanding the benefits, the real benefits of having that multi-generational workforce in their environment and what it can actually mean, not only to the employees, but to the business itself.
So Daniel, in the work that you're doing, what are the main challenges? I know I sort of reflect on my career, for instance, when I was younger, you're keen to advance your career, you want to get promotion. I don't think that you sort of really think much about older members of the workforce at that stage. You're very much about you, aren't you? And how you're going to get on and get better at your job and all the rest of it. And now, as an older person of workforce, I look and think, well, how can I help younger people maybe learn more about the job, help them with their skills and developing their career. But yeah, sort of how can we get both sections of the population to kind of understand understand each other a bit more in the workplace?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great question around how we can drive that better understanding. I think the first thing is recognizing what we all bring to work, and that is that we bring what I would call our human capital. So we bring our unique skills and perspective and our understanding of the work, but we also bring social capital, and that is our networks or our understanding. And I think recognizing that people of different ages are able to leverage different aspects of human capital and social capital. So for example, if we have older workers and we're working in a company where a number of our target market is within a particular segment, how are we going to serve them well? How are we going to understand their needs if we don't have representation within our own organization of that customer? That's not going to be as effective for business as if we had that age diversity there. And I think the other thing that comes into that is the people that we know. So when we talk about social networks, it's actually who can we help bring into the organization, or what partners can we create? And what we see is that where there's good age diversity and where it's working well together with good understanding, we're seeing that people of different ages recognize the unique contributions that their co-workers are bringing, and they're able to leverage that human and also that social capital to really drive results, really.
We've got a good question here from Peter Abrahamson, who's actually one of the experts on our workplace platform. And Peter's asking, is there a trend in how older members of a workforce are perceived depending on the age of the CEO or the business owner? So I guess that's quite an interesting one. Daniel, do you want to pick up on that? Or Michael, off you go.
Sorry, from my perspective, when I've seen that, getting back to your earlier question to me about what challenges do I see, one of the challenges also is regarding senior leadership. It's the belief and the actual appetite to realize that there is something there that can be changed, that can be done. You often get CEOs which potentially tie in with what you said earlier, sort of young, vibrant, trying to get things moving, and this is the way we need to be doing business and where we need to take the company, where my career is going, etc. But I think if you don't have that senior leadership buy-in, then often you will get some sort of pushback in terms of what can be done. There are a lot of people in organizations that really do want to make a difference and really do want to challenge the status quo in terms of the issues that are out there, but often that takes time and money and effort, and if that's not being driven from the top, then you can often find yourself in a situation where you can't drive it to where, at least to have those conversations, because the real support that's needed isn't there.
Yeah, Denise, do you want to pick up on that, the trend depending on the age of the business owner?
Yeah, I mean, I think anything that you look at, senior leadership buying is absolutely crucial, and this is one aspect where it is key. There also has to be the understanding of that senior leadership, that if you're going to entice and you see the value of older people working in your employment, is the fact you've got to offer those individuals, just because they're older, the myth that, if you like, their caring responsibilities or whatever have disappeared, and your focus then goes on to your younger workforce. Understanding that they might have childcare commitments or whatever. You know, there are a lot of older people, I'm an example of that, where I have got caring responsibilities of both ages. So I'm also not only looking after older parents, but also juggling the sort of childcare of our own children as well. So having that understanding by senior leadership of the requirements of that older workforce, that they may have other commitments, and being prepared to offer them more flexible working, you know, the needs are exactly the same as your younger workforce.
Yeah, interesting. And Daniel, finally, what are your thoughts? That does the treatment of older members of the workforce depend on whether the person at the top of the tree is of that age or much younger, and they take a different approach?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two additional things it can depend on. So if we think about the age of the leadership team, often I think we can conflate seniority with age. So in some organizations, what we have is we have this dynamic where we have the older leaders at the top and the younger people on the front line, but that's not necessarily true of all businesses and all industries. And so the dynamic can be quite different depending on that makeup. The other thing that's really important is, I think, being older is very industry dependent. And what that means, so for example, in the tech industry, being older can unfortunately mean being aged over 35, which is really frightening. And I think in the tech industry, being older is often seen as a huge disadvantage, whereas there are other professions. For example, I'm in academia, and for a professor, we have an expectation that professors are often of a particular age or a particular seniority. So in that case, being older might not necessarily be seen in quite the same way. So I think the context of the age of the leadership is one part of that context, but I think there are other contexts also that can change the way that age is viewed.
So what are some of those other contexts then, Daniel?
Certainly the industry that we're working in, and I think a little bit around the prototypicality. So I think we kind of have this, Michael referred to stereotypes, but we do have certain expectations of what certain roles should be. We have ideas about what a librarian looks like, or a human resource manager, or a software engineer. And often these are really unhelpful narratives. And I think we also have a narrative around what a career trajectory should look like. And part of living with an aging population is our careers are becoming more dynamic. We're making more lateral moves and complete changes. And often we will find ourselves at older ages doing something new. So I think for people who have perhaps had a narrative of up or out, or that a career is an upward trajectory until you reach a retirement cliff, I think we have to be challenging those, and we have to be rethinking what our careers look like as we collectively get older.
Denise, again, I guess that comes back to certainly to the women in the workforce as well. Very often, women are stepping out of the workforce at certain times and then might find it a struggle to get back in. And as we are all sitting here, Michael, Denise, you're busy working still, at an older age, as am I. We many people want to keep involved in working. They want some kind of job. They don't want to sort of sit at home, watch the television, or go out on the golf course all day long, although some do.
I think there are huge similarities, really, with younger women who drop out of the workforce to have their children and then struggle to get back in, if you like, when the child is of a certain age, to get back in on that ladder at the same level and still progress. And that's exactly the same for an older person. So an older person, for example, I stepped off the ladder at 50 thinking, wow, isn't early retirement going to be wonderful? And then decided to get back on the ladder. And that first sort of few rungs of getting back onto that ladder was difficult. And it's about, how do you sell yourself as an older woman? And I think it also applies to men as well. How do you sell all of that expertise, that knowledge that you've got? And often you're going back into an industry, into a sector where certainly, types of communication, the technology, everything has changed, and you are on a steep learning curve. And it needs a confident woman to actually try and get herself in those older years to try and go back into the workforce.
Yeah. Recruitment process then, Michael, perhaps we could look at this as well, because a lot of applications now for jobs. I know you're not supposed to ask people their age, but they can tell, can't they, when you've got a CV that's 3 pages long. So how do we encourage employers to be open to all ages when they're looking to fill posts, rather than just looking at one particular category of the workforce?
I think that's a tough question to answer in terms of giving this is the answer. But when we look at the processes that are currently in place, I think any role probably garnishes quite a large number of responses. So you do have this automated process in place, the ATS. So if the keywords aren't there, you're not going to get through anyway. So, and that's regardless of what age you are. In terms of the age itself, yes, a lot of people are leaving their age off. But what do you do on your CV if there's certain pertinent information, excuse me, that could relate to transferable skills or something that you can offer as an individual? It can be difficult to know what to leave off. So I think a lot of people are being recommended to keep the CV to a couple of pages if they can. That can be a difficult thing. So when it comes to the organizations trying to give a level playing field for the older workers, I think the actual process itself is something that really needs to be looked at more closely, because there are too many must-haves in terms of the recent technology changes, for instance, or applications that keep coming onto the market. And yes, people can get trained up on that, but also organizations will tend to focus on maybe people that are already in the organization or younger that can be trained in there, because they see it as a worthwhile investment. If they're getting older workers, they may not necessarily feel the same way, think, well, we're going to train these people and we're going to lose those skills probably sooner than we would lose somebody else. So I think the whole process about how they do this is I don't have the actual answer, but it certainly needs to be looked at. And there are organizations out there that are attempting different things like blind CVs. And there are organizations now offering applications, a system that they run, which literally takes out their AI driven, which takes out anything that reflects to what they may be as an individual, including age. Where that will take us, I really don't know. But it's about, which Daniel said earlier, it's about, hey, we're all individuals. It doesn't matter what age we are. We've all got something to offer, and we shouldn't be really looking at the age as a barrier as to what that is that we can offer. And I think that's the biggest thing. It's built into people's wiring up here that if you're older, then you don't have as long to give. Maybe you are going to suffer from other conditions like your own health conditions. You're going to want time off. It's going to be a bit of a drain on us to teach you. So it's the mindset that needs changing, to be honest with you.
Yeah, we've had a question here from Lauren, actually picking up on what you and Denise have both said. Lauren, thank you very much for the question. She asked, do you have any recommendations for how to support and grow tech confidence, coming off from what you were saying, Denise, about it being a steep learning curve when technology changes? And we hear this a lot, don't we, Denise, in the workplace, where there are tensions, younger people in the workforce are saying, well, why don't we do this like that? There's all the technology there, we can use it. Why do we still do it this way? And seeing sort of, older people maybe as not facilitating change and not being able to adapt quickly enough to all the changes that we're going through with technological development.
Yeah, I mean, I think teams, leadership just have to take on board that if you're going to take an older person into the workforce, they're bringing lots of other valuable skills and knowledge into the business. And you may well have to provide additional training for them. And that understanding has to be there. And there shouldn't be the assumption that just because a person of a certain age doesn't have that skill, that they then cannot learn that new skill. So I think I would say what has to happen is that within a team setting, if you like, I think what can happen is the older person can feel threatened, can feel undermined by probably a younger team that knows those skills. It's been sort of embedded in them from school, college, university, whatever. But that doesn't mean to say everything has to be done in a certain way. There are lots of ways of communicating, as we know, and I, as an older person, may be able to offer a different way to what that team has already been set up to do.
Daniel, I'm presuming you've been looking at this, and particularly, obviously lots of people are worried about the impact that AI is going to have on jobs anyway. How do we get this acceptance that you don't have to be 18 and just coming out of uni to understand that how technology can be used in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a real problem, but the problem is that we've got really carried away with this idea of younger people being great with technology. And actually, a lot of the research shows that when it comes to the workplace, that's not quite the full story. So often what we find is that, yes, younger people are more enthusiastic about new technology solutions, but older people just tend to be a little bit more judicious. So they want to see that the solution is going to provide a benefit before jumping to it. So I think we can all agree that there's some aspect of, well, it's great to adopt new technologies, but only if they are going to deliver a better way of working. So I think sometimes we need to make sure that we're not mistaking technology enthusiasm for better technological progress. And then I think the other thing is that we have to respect that only a certain number of technologies are central to people's job roles. So, for example, my mother, she's an artist. It's not central to her role to be using a computer every day, and her technology skills are not great. But then, I know plenty of software engineers in their 60s and 70s who are excellent with the technical skills that they need because they're central to their job. And I think when we talk about training, one of the things that the research shows is that good training is good for everyone, and good management practices alike. So I think a lot of the differences that we see of people of different generations when it comes to technology, and also other behaviors in the workplace, they actually get bridged when we have really good training in place. So good training is going to be good for everyone, but it might be especially beneficial for some of the older workers who haven't had the same experience or past experiences with that technology.
So with all this that we're talking about then, Daniel, is it best, I know you can't do this in every team that you work in, and you may not work in a team, you may just work as an individual within a business, but if you do have a sort of team structure, have you been looking at whether it's better to have older and younger people together in a team, you know, and actually that's the way that you should approach that in terms of your business structure? I don't know, you know, that there are, I'm sort of trying to see, there are obviously some industries where you probably do get lots of young people together. I guess, you know, if you're a startup and you know, there's a bunch of young people just trying to get a new idea off the ground. But if you're in a large organization, say professional services or something like that, you might have thousands of employees. So how do you get this understanding between the ages and the exchange of experience and ideas and skills? You know, do you start with just trying to make teams a bit more inclusive of age?
Yeah, I mean, I think as leaders, one of the things that leaders have to be doing in order to create the right conditions is not necessarily structural, but it's more about the practices. So showing a commitment to hiring people, regardless of their age, is a really big one. Investing in people's training and opportunity, regardless of age. Not making assumptions about what people's career goals are. I think we're often assuming that younger people are more ambitious, but actually when we look at career goals, we see that older members of the workforce are some of those who have the most ambitious career goals. So I think it's really about, in the same way as we want to promote inclusion and not make assumptions based on gender or race or ethnicity, we have to be doing the same with age. And certainly if we can bring teams together where we do have people of different age groups spending time together, then we do believe and we do see that there's a productivity benefit to it, and that people of all ages have higher levels of job satisfaction. It can be really beneficial. You gave the example of a tech startup which is potentially laden with younger people. Well, how are they going to access the social networks that they need to be able to sell their product back into market, you know, without people who represent potentially different generations that might have links into, say, their clients, whether, you know, no matter what segment their client is. So I think there's a diversity dividend, if you like, to be had from having people of different ages working together.
And Michael, do you see this in the work that you do, that actually you know, bringing the age groups together does help provide better support for everybody in the workplace?
Yeah, very much so. I think picking up on a point you said earlier about professional services type company, I know there has been a bunch of surveys done within organizations such as those where they have purposely tried to bring different ages together to see what benefit it brings to them as an organization, of course, but also to the employees. And a number of them have actually reported an uptick in terms of, could I say, how the employees felt more valued, how they felt they were actually being listened to, how all of a sudden they realized that they weren't just alone in their concerns on what it was they wanted. But in addition to that, the organizations were seeing an uplift in terms of their bottom line, believe it or not. You know, I can't give you the actual information, but I know there are certain surveys out there that did that. But also picking up on another point which Daniel was talking about around bringing the ages together. One of the things that we have found is that if you have an organization that is trying to fix whatever problem they think they may have, by bringing the different ages together, you do create your own multi-generational community. Now, many organizations will set up what they call employee resource groups, or give it another name, but essentially bringing them together. And often the voices of whoever needs to really be listened to should all be part of that group. Sometimes you'll get some of these groups that are just made up with a handful of people that don't really represent the cross section of the employee workforce that are needed there. And I think when an organization then attempts to fix, I call it fixing the problem they think they might have, or at least look at things a different way, they need to think about what is the makeup of those employees, how are they engaging with them. It's not about saying, tell us what you want, we'll give it to you, but it's about actually talking to them. So, you know, if they can open up that more and say, let's understand more about our workforce. And also, in addition to that, you've then got the added benefit, hopefully, that if they get that right, then all people that are actually looking for work that are aging may start seeing those organizations as somebody who really does take it seriously and who really takes on board the different needs of older workers that are out there, and they become, dare I say, an age-friendly employment sector within that company. So I think there's lots more to be done, but it's about how you approach it. And some organizations fail because they think they know what to do, but without speaking to people who can help them and show them what needs to be done and why. But I think there's a lot of work to be done, and we're not going to fix it soon. It's going to take a long time. It's already taken a long time. It's going to take more time, unfortunately.
Denise, I know you're talking to sort of policymakers about some of these issues, aren't you? Do you know, are there changes that need to happen in terms of policies in the workplace or government legislation at any stage? Is that what's being discussed?
Well, I think one of the things we have to stop focusing on is age. You know, age is nothing but a number, you know, and my outlook on life as a 66-year-old could be completely different to anybody else of the same age range as myself, but equally, because of my outlook on life is probably very much sort of thinking of it from a younger point of view. I think we have to just sit back and think, if we're going to be mixing age ranges together, or mixing that multi-generational workforce together, the actual age of that workforce is actually irrelevant. We should be looking at stripping that back and just looking at the skills, the knowledge, the expertise, the personalities, and everything that mix together. And certainly from the work that we're doing, and certainly sort of looking at the policy stuff, I think people are realizing now that as we have an aging population, that aging population, as we know, that age is getting higher and higher. What was an issue, or what were concerns, say 10, 20 years ago, of what a 60-year-old portrays themselves as at that point, is completely different to now. So I think we have to strip away the whole sort of label of age, and you know, if somebody is willing to work and has the skills and experience to be able to do a position or a job well, age should be irrelevant.
So Daniel, how do we make age irrelevant in terms of, you know, recruiting people? Is there a magic wand that we can wave?
Yeah, I think controversially, I think we actually need to make it relevant. So I'm not a big believer in blind CVs. I actually think that as organizations, particularly larger organizations, what we need to be doing is looking around us and saying, well, what is the working population around? What does our diversity look like, and where are there gaps? And where there are gaps, being open and transparent about it. Good example recently was there was a company in the US who was a tech company, and they said, unlike many other tech companies, we hire older workers and younger workers too. But really what they were doing was they were making a transparent statement that they were seeking applications from older workers, and that they were committed to getting the top talent out of that pool, and they were speaking to a pool of applicants who had that fear that they wouldn't be taken seriously at other organisations. And I think we've seen that success in other areas as well, where we see companies that specifically encourage people of whether it be based on gender or race, ethnicity, to apply for jobs where they have gaps. So I think to a certain extent, we don't want to be age blind. I think we want to see that. I think, to Denise's point, age is very different for different people, and life course and other things. There can be a lot of variation. So age isn't everything, but it's also not nothing. And I think it's a really difficult balance between, we don't want to totally dismiss it, but we don't want to make it relevant in contexts where it's not necessarily going to demonstrate what someone's skills, ability, or other experiences are.
And of course, looking at the future, if people are having fewer children, there might be a shortage in the workforce. I mean, obviously there are issues at the moment of trying to encourage older people back into the workforce, but technology might take some of the jobs that we now know away from us. So you've really got to look hard at this workforce now and what the future, our future workforces will look like, don't you, Daniel?
Yeah, I'm particularly concerned about this. So I think some of the research that I've done suggests that older candidates who have the same skills and experience as candidates who are younger than them, they face substantial bias. And I think it's a real issue if we've got people going into career changes and retraining and reskilling opportunities. We want to know that there are going to be opportunities for them at the end of that reskilling. Otherwise, people aren't going to do it. So we really need to ensure that when we have reskilling pipelines, that we're reskilling people, particularly at middle and older ages, that we're reskilling them towards a position, and we're not just reskilling them and then sending them back out into the market where they're potentially not going to be competitive due to age-based bias. So I think that's a real challenge.
And Michael, that middle age actually is quite an interesting one that Daniel was just mentioning there. They're very often somebody's been in a career for a long time, but actually they want a change and a new challenge in life. And we need to make that a bit easier, don't we?
We do. And I think, again, we could talk for hours about what's wrong in the marketplace and the system, etc. But to sort of try and pick up on a couple of points regarding that, where what Daniel was saying about blind CVs, I think the issue with that, for instance, as an example, this is where organisations are saying we are going to be fair. So what we're going to do is going to strip everything out. I've yet to see it work in practice that positively, because in the reality is that in the real world, and I've spoken to many people about this who have found themselves in that particular situation, which is you may send a CV, you may try and strip it of everything that identifies who you are, what you are, and it's just your skills. But once you get to an interview, or once you go online for an interview, you can sometimes even see the shock. Oh my goodness, I didn't realize you were that old, or I didn't realize you looked like that. And I think it's the picking up on Daniel's point about bias. Yeah, absolutely is. I think what tends to happen is that people build up a picture of who the ideal candidate is. And yes, Denise is exactly right. Age shouldn't matter, but unfortunately, in the real world, it plays a huge part unfairly, where when people are faced with being older than maybe the interviewer or the organization thought they might be, then when you're faced with that, all of a sudden it becomes a barrier for you. So for me, it's really about, it's in an ideal world, which we are a long way away from, in an ideal world is accepting people for who they are, what they can bring to the table. And being older does have its advantages if people can open up their minds and understand if you're in a situation in the workplace where a younger person has never faced before. As an example, you as an older worker may say, well, actually, you know, I've had that happen to me a number of times, and this is the way I approached it. And that wisdom then starts to play in how the younger workforce can learn from their older workforce on that basis. So there's just so much that can be done, but it's, as I said earlier, it's about opening up the mind. You know, there is no silver bullet to this. And, you know, you can put as many processes in place as you like to sort of try and make it fairer. But it's the mindset, it's the education of the people that are within organizations that are tasked with playing their part to make that difference. If they're not actually doing it correctly or understand why they should be doing it that way, then there's a lot of work to be done within those organizations.
And just picking up on that with you, Denise, I mean, mentorship can be a wonderful thing at an older age. As Michael was saying, you know, passing on the experience, helping younger people to develop in the workplace, it actually is really rewarding as well to be able to do that. So, you know, maybe workplaces should be thinking a lot more about the value of that.
I think so. And I mean, this is part of the work that we do with United for All Ages. And whilst it's a very much sort of an unpaid task, this is why we encourage older people to be working in things like schools and whatever to sort of do that mentoring, whether it's reading, career choice or whatever. But the one point I just want to raise before we come to an end is, I think what worries me, individuals that have decided that they are going to retire, as we all know, everybody has been feeling the pinch financially. And I think what we have to ensure, and what does worry us, is that as we go forward, what we don't want to see is older people who feel they're going to have to go back into the workplace in order to be financially stable, is that they then don't get pigeonholed into those jobs that basically the young people don't want. So, you know, whether that's retail, hospitality, care sector or whatever, you know, we do need to insist that these ensure that anybody going back into the workplace could potentially be able to pick up where they left off, and it doesn't mean that they're going to have to go into these, if you like, lower paid jobs.
That's a very good point. Well, as Denise was saying, though, we are just about to run out of time. So perhaps I could finish the conversation, and it's been really enlightening, and thank you so much for the questions you've already asked. And if there is another question that anybody would like to ask, please do put that in the comments now, and we'll get to that. But perhaps we could sum up then, really, about, you know, we started off, this is all about, you know, how to manage a multi-generational workforce. You know, what would be the main message that you'd want to leave our audience today? And perhaps, Michael, could I start with you? What do you think is the main takeaway that you'd like to pass on today?
I think my main takeaway is a mixture of things, but generally it's regarding organizations, as I've mentioned earlier, need to think about what it is they're doing today, what they could be doing to help the older generation, the older workers, and how that actually plays into their own workforce across all ages. And where they don't understand what they're doing, there's plenty of help out there. Ask for it. There's too many people trying to implement change for the good, but without really understanding what they're implementing, why and how. So my message simply is, you know, just start looking at your own organization today. Are we doing what we've been talking about today? If we're not, what can we do to make that first step? So that would be my message that I'd like to leave.
Excellent. Denise, how about you? What would you like to leave the audience with?
Okay, well, all I'll say is then is you know, I couldn't agree more with what Michael is saying, but all I would say is just make sure that your policies in-house are inclusive for all ages. Do not believe that, you know, older people's requirements may not be the same similar requirements to a younger workforce, and that flexible offer and benefits needs to be open to all.
Very good. And Daniel, finally, perhaps you'd like to sum up your message to the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So from the inclusion initiative, I'd have to echo Denise's point about making policies inclusive. And I also think that, you know, what we want from our work and from our employees has a lot more in common across the ages than it does difference. And that's flexibility, autonomy, and opportunities for development. But I'd also say that we have to be inclusive in our management practices as leaders. And I think too often we draw the line of where inclusion ends. And I think I'd really encourage us all to question ourselves as to ask when opportunities do come up, or when we're leading our teams, are we being truly age inclusive? Because certainly when we are, we see that there are big productivity benefits. And I'd also like to say that, you know, for everyone who's attended today and who's interested, if you'd like to get involved in the research and in inclusion research more generally, we have a number of really exciting projects running at the moment. We're always looking for people in organisations to give us some real practical support and to be involved, really. And so as we can help uncover what works, and we can share it with everyone.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you, all three of you. Well, that's all about all we've got time for. Fantastic sum ups from all our guests there. This conversation was brought to you by Frog Systems. Our wellbeing streaming service, Ashia, is a complete on-demand platform full of personal stories, expert opinion, and signposted support and resources to support your employees through the different challenges that they face. And obviously these workplace webinars that we do are part of the platform as well. You can find out more by visiting our website, and obviously do follow us on social media as well. But thank you so much to Daniel, to Denise, to Michael for your insight and expertise today. And thank you to everybody who tuned in to watch. I hope this conversation helps you bring change to your workplaces. Enjoy the rest of your day.